Member.
Thank you for that, Minister. So a couple more Métis related questions for you. The government had a Métis Nation relationship accord. It was 2.0. It was signed in 2006. Included commitments to provide regular reporting. Can the minister give an update on the most recent time there was a report published?
Minister.
Chair, it took me a moment to get the answer. I wanted to be sure the very specific question posed, and I wanted to make sure I had accurate information. I have spoken with our Assistant Deputy Minister, who is responsible for this division, and I want to start by saying that the Métis people have constitutionally protected rights. The province recognizes that. They were affirmed in our Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. There are probably 90,000 Métis people living in British Columbia. They're an important community, and so the member quite properly referred to the Métis Nation Relationship Accord number 2. And we continue to work through that accord to cultivate a better relationship with the Métis people so they can access good social and economic opportunities that make a difference in their lives. We are trying to use this accord as a springboard to establish a long overdue better relationship with the Métis population, often called the invisible Indigenous population of our province. I can report to the member through you, Chair, that there has been no report that has been written. COVID has been our enemy, but we are still outstanding and active. The report is still outstanding. It requires to be undertaken jointly with the Métis, the Métis Nation, British Columbia, and that work is ongoing. And active discussions, I'm advised, are underway.
Member.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate there's not been a report issued recently. The question was, when was the last report issued? So I'm wondering if we can get a follow-up on when the last report issued was. And it was signed with the previous government, the 2.0. And what progress then has been made in addition to the report with the Métis peoples of BC?
Minister. Thank you very much, Chair. The question, I'm sorry if I misunderstood the question. When when was the last report? I cannot report that. I do not have that information. I will undertake to provide that information to the member. As to what progress is underway, as I said earlier, there are active discussions. We have to come up with a joint document. We're doing so together. I can report to the member through you, Chair, that we have had, I as Minister have had conversations with Métis leadership on several occasions now, not only through the Declaration Act process in terms of the action plan work that we're doing, but also in terms of alignment of laws, where we've involved the Métis leadership in describing the legislation that needs to be aligned and current bills that are going forward. They are very much engaged in that process. So, in addition to the relationship accord number 2, we also have a very vibrant relationship that we're trying to create with the Métis Nation BC.
Member.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if the minister, the ministry, the government supports distinction-based funding for Indigenous governments, and if so, and it's not in place already, will there be advocacy on his part to ministerial colleagues?
Minister.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, a very interesting question posed by the member. He talks of distinction-based funding. I want to start by saying the British Columbia programming that's available from Ministry of Education, Advanced Education, any number of programs, the extent to which they are earmarked for Indigenous peoples would of course include Métis. We point out again that Section 35, very specific of the Constitution Act 1982, very clearly connotes Métis as part of Indigenous peoples, and we live in the spirit of that commitment, that constitutional requirement. I mentioned earlier there are 90,000 Métis people, we expect, we believe, most of whom live in urban areas, and so there's a challenge to reach them and provide them with the services that they are entitled to, but we do our best. There are other Indigenous peoples, many more of course, who have land-based treaty rights, either treaty rights or Aboriginal rights, and title based on their connection with the land. The Métis do not have land-based rights in British Columbia, at least that's our understanding. Of course they do in the prairie provinces, but they do not here. So there inevitably will be a distinction. But we go back to where I started. Indigenous peoples, as defined in the Constitution Act 1982, Aboriginal peoples there, definitely includes the Métis, and we're working hard to establish a good working relationship with our Métis citizens.
Member.
Thank you. Given that the minister is indicating that the government does not feel the Métis have land-based rights, and I'm not arguing that either side of that, I'm just restating, but the commitments in DRIPA how will the government then recognize duty to consult all Indigenous bodies? Does that mean that with DRIPA and the land-based view of the minister, there will be one set of consultation on projects and initiatives moving forward and a different set based on land rights or not?
Minister.
You, Mr. Chair, the action plan under the Declaration Act is a very, very exciting process I'm currently engaged in. And in doing so, we're dealing with the complex array of First Nations who present, or Indigenous peoples, I should say, who exist in our province. For example, we have modern treaty. I think Niska, I think the Manuth, Tla'amin. We have modern treaties, Tawasin, of course. We have the Douglas treaties, a different category of treaties on Vancouver Island. We have Treaty 8 in the Northeast, an ancient treaties, and then McLeod Lake Indian Band that has adhered to Treaty 8. And we have Métis. So my point, and of course, the individual First Nations, 204 in the province. I mentioned 35 languages. It is a very complex world, and we are trying our best to ensure that we meet First Nations and other Indigenous peoples on their own terms to make sure that we have a viable reconciliation and that economic and social prosperity is shared widely. So the action plan is an example of how we're working with each category of those nations and Indigenous peoples. And so, for example, we're working in specific issues to address Métis, specific issues of interest to the modern treaty alliance, specific issues to deal with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and First Nation Leadership Council, etc. So we have all of these governing bodies, plus the proper rights and title holders on the ground, which would be the 204 nations that exist in British Columbia. Inevitably, therefore, there will be distinctions because of the complexity of the various Indigenous groups that call British Columbia home. I'm happy to say that the action plan under the Declaration Act, which we're hoping to bring out in the next short while, will give us a great illustration of how we're working to meet the specific needs of those differing Indigenous peoples.